Hi, I'm Phil Constantine. In this edition of Travels with Phil, we're traveling back in time to 1977. This is one in a series of interviews which I did for a program called To the Point for Rice University. I helped to create this program, which showcased some of the brilliant people associated with Rice. This episode is with Rice professor Dr. Baruch Brody. We will discuss some of the issues related to the Karen Ann Quinlan case, such as the right to life and euthanasia. Dr. Brody was a distinguished professor and member of the faculty at Rice from 1975 until around his death in 2018. There are links to his biography and works in the description field below. I have added images for this video, but the audio remains exactly as it was broadcast in October 1977.
Should anyone have the right to decide if anybody else should die? Euthanasia, or the Quinlan case. We're going to be talking about that next.
To the Point, presented by Rice University.
Welcome to the Point. I'm Phil Constantine, and my guest on today's program is Dr. Baruch Brody, who's chairman of the philosophy department. And Doctor, who should or what should be considered when you're thinking about whether someone should have the right to decide of their own decision rather than somebody else forcing it on them?
Well, I tend to be a libertarian on this sort of issue, and to think that if the individual in question who is going to die is of sound mind and is aware of the consequences and wants to die, that they have the right to do so.
Now, in a case such as Karen Ann Quinlan, where there had been statements to the fact before the accident that she was involved in that she might not have wanted to die, how can you decide in a case like this where someone's been brought about by an illness and you can't actually say, now is the time to choose?
I think in general there's been a lot of interest in that case because of the fact that she had expressed an opinion earlier on. Of course, she'd expressed it when she wasn't contemplating her own death, but had expressed the theoretical opinion that she would prefer to die rather than to live in the sort of state that she's living in now. The trouble with opinions expressed sort of early-ish on, when one isn't facing the reality of one's own death, is it's very hard to know how serious to take them. I contrast that with a case that some people came to see me about recently, in which somebody had entered the hospital on a given day and had told the family the night before that that's what she would want if she had turned into a state of comatose. She would want not to be kept alive. That seems to me to be sort of different, in part because the person was immediately facing the context of their own going into the hospital, being ill, and the possibilities that did actually eventuate in that case.
It's always sort of tried to ask, but in today's society, is there any basic, fundamental approach to this question, or...
I think, like all other interesting questions, the answer is probably no. See, part of it goes back to the fact that there are many people who hold the view that we're not even entitled, even if we were around to make the decision, to save ourselves, that we prefer to die. People who feel that there's somehow an obligation on the doctor and society to keep people alive no matter what. Well, if you range all the way from that group to the other group, at the other extreme, that would allow doctors to decide for people whether they should be kept alive or not, and all the parties in between, you're not likely to have some clear-cut consensus on this question.
Then how is the legal part, or the legal standings as they're going about, how is this being debated in the communities? Does there appear to be a community debate on the issue, or does it just appear to be the whim of whoever's in the legislature?
I think there is a real community debate. I think also a bit of a consensus is developing in our own legal system in connection with the matter of the living will. As I'm sure you know, there are a number of states, California, for example, is one of them, in which the person, or a person, of sound mind, mature age, and so forth, is allowed to leave instructions about the sort of medical treatment that they would want to have cut off if they found themselves in certain positions where it was merely maintaining a sort of artificial continued existence. That's, I think, becoming a widely accepted option, much discussed in many states, and I wouldn't be surprised if down the road that didn't become a very standard thing in our law.
It's been something that's been said at many times on TV shows, or doctor shows as they're called easily enough, that sometimes the surgeons are too quick to jump on somebody who has just died to get whatever organs there are possibly. Well, due to both the living will and also what is commonly called the Harvard Standards for Death, which I can't enumerate completely at this moment, but basically brainwave flat, and then no respiration, and then no reflexes. How is this being done? What appears to be the discussions both ways as to how soon you should really go in and how much effort should really be put into making sure there's absolutely no life left before you try to do such things as organ transplants?
Well, I think actually two questions are raised by that. One has to do, of course, with the definition of death. It was traditionally the case that no one was considered dead until there had been a complete and irrevocable cessation of the functioning of the heart and of the lungs. And with the possibility of artificially keeping these organs going, you have people that can be kept alive can be kept with the heart and lungs going for a long period of time. This posed problems, particularly as the transplant became important, and therefore there was a move towards this Harvard brain death. But many people caution us that one of the motives for this might be doctors who are keen to get in. And this has been a real problem and has led in some jurisdictions for there to be some reluctance to adopt this approach to death, to want to maintain a more traditional attitude. So there is one sort of problem that's raised by that case, by your remarks, and an extremely crucial one. The other is, of course, the possibility of abuse in the matter of living wills and instructions in general given to physicians. Physicians who are keen about the possibility of transplants, it is sometimes suggested, might be very suggestive to parties about the value of signing such wills. I worry less about that in the second case. The typical example of somebody signing a living will is when they're alive and well, and there isn't much of an opportunity for coercion or imposition.
How much possibility does it appear to be, or what, is there a real problem of the fact that once, even if you're, say, of sound mind, now your body has been severely deteriorated, but how honestly can a person be said to have a sound mind if they're in the condition of already facing death, knowing whether or not they should go ahead and die? Because there have been people who have, quote-unquote, miraculously been brought back from death.
Well, I think two things. One, keep in mind that living wills are typically signed when people are still healthy and not near death, so that's an important difference. But when people leave, or when people haven't signed a living will, and then now ask, being conscious and so forth, that they would prefer to have medical treatment cease. This is, of course, not the living will case, but the case of someone who's conscious. You might say to them, and it might well be advice to them, consider the possibility of a reversal, even though it seems medically unlikely. But I think the attitude of the libertarian is that that's their decision, that they have to weigh that likelihood against the other likelihood of prolonged pain, of degradation, and it's they who have to weigh those two and make a decision. For someone else to say, yes, but there's always a chance, is to sort of impose his value of how much that chance is worth against the person's judgment that he doesn't think it's worth that much.
Then again, there's the other side of the story, the person who's been told they were going to die of some disease, as it were, and then say 6 months they're going to die, and they've resolved themselves to dying, they've completely terminated all activities, and all of a sudden that death has been taken away from them completely by a quote-unquote miracle cure or something like that, total remission. What kind of things are going through the mind then? How does one approach this situation?
I think the first thing is they probably consider themselves very lucky. Obviously, the existence of this sort of phenomena makes it wise for people to be prudent in their decisions as to what or what not they would want to have done to them, what sort of cessations of treatment they would want. I think very often there are people who relinquish hope too quickly or too early, and this would be an imprudent decision on their part. Good friends should perhaps counsel them against them. But that's rather different than the question of if that's the decision they want to make in their maturity of judgment.
There's another interesting point to this, is that some people who one would say have a suicidal tendency might look at the living will as some way for their life to really do some good by the fact that it may part of their body which they feel is no good by their own philosophical reasonings, whatever that may be, would go to help somebody else who might be able to live a full life. Now, in your own capacity as a doctor of philosophy, how would you approach this situation? How would you discuss this, both pro and con, or just discussing the different sides of this?
Well, I think there are a number of good points that are raised by your question. One is a sense of people, and I think a legitimate sense, that throughout one's life has certain meaning through what one's able to do, not only for herself, for others as well. I think it's a legitimate thing for people to feel, and an important thing for people to feel, that they can give some meaning as well in that way to their death as well as to their life. For some people, I think that's a very comforting thought and a very important thought, and it's one that's well worth their dwelling upon. I think in the case of other people, there are more personal considerations involved. Their sense of attitude is that I want to avoid the degradation and the pain, and perhaps even more often the degradation than the pain of these terminal illnesses, of the need for constant care. I want to avoid becoming like an infant again. So for some people, the meaning of their life and their death is to be found in this ability to help even at the very end. For others, this is a matter of more personal values.
Do you cover these kinds of subjects in your college courses?
Yes, we have a number of courses actually at Rice at various levels that deal with these problems.
What seems to be the kind of questions that come from the students? What do they seem to be interested in? Is it merely just in the realm of how one approaches the problem, or does it seem to be within the situation of life and death itself?
Well, I think there are two sorts of things that we try to inculcate their interest in. I think that they have an interest on. One is obviously the specific problems, whether it be euthanasia or abortion or what have you. The other is, I think, a growing sense that people want to learn how to think about these questions, how to sort of search out in a constructive and reasonable fashion a sense of values. And that's sort of a more general thing, which I sense a real desire on the part of students, and which we certainly try in teaching philosophically about these topics to deal with.
Well, what would you suggest to somebody, say, in the audience who's considering this possibility? What would you say to them would be if there is a formula or a series of thoughts that they need to, either get a yes or no answer for themselves?
Well, that's very hard to answer. I think these are the sort of questions in which you don't get pat formulas or sets of questions to which you have yes and no. I think Aristotle said a long time ago, one can ask, or it is a sign of the ignorant, or the boorish, I guess is the word he used, to demand precision where precision is impossible. I think this is very often the case that people have the sense of frustration about these value questions. We can't have the precise, clear set of questions such that we need the answers. And it just doesn't exist. The circumstances of each case are different. What is required really is less a set of formulas of questions to which you get the answers, but rather a sort of set of in-depth explorations.
It's a personal approach to the situation.
It can be social in the possibility of communicating with others and engaging in dialogue with others, but it has to be almost unique in a way. It's not the sort of thing that lends itself to easy generalizations.
Is there one generalization, per se, then that you might say would pretty well hold to almost all cases?
Yes, shun all easy generalizations. I wish there was something clearer than that, but there really isn't, I think.
Sounds like don't take anybody else's advice but mine, and my advice is don't take anybody's advice. Well, thinking about that then, why should one discuss death, contemplate it actively as opposed to merely letting it occur?
Well, I think there are obviously many reasons why. Sometimes the mode of which one faces death can greatly affect part of what remains of one's life, and also affects greatly what happens to other people surrounding one. I think one of the greatest miseries that people who are still conscious during their terminal illness feel is the sort of surrounding misery to those who they have loved greatly. The person who is dying over a long time at great cost and great pain is often well aware of what his death means to people who have to go on living afterwards. Being able to discuss death, confront the phenomena of death, make plans in accordance with that, enables one to do things that can have a significant benefit or beneficial impact on others that one cares a great deal about.
So I would assume you'd say such programs as Make Today Count or Make Every Day Count, which are for people who are terminally ill, but teach them how to act when they're terminally ill, would be a good...
Extremely important. It's obviously great kindness for the people involved, and also tremendously important for those who surround them.
Then that's the other question. Is there a general feeling as toward how people who are either relatives or friends of someone who is dying or at the point of terminally ill, how they should approach that person?
I think there are a few sort of guidelines to be kept in mind. Listen to what the person is saying and see what they're really concerned about. I think all too often the people who are close to the dying are so aware of their own problems that they don't have a chance to deal and help the person facing death confront his problems. That sort of kindness of listening and dealing with their problems as they see them is a very important thing and often missing in these relationships.
Anything other than that?
I would go and say something about honesty, but that would take us into a long topic. I think that those who tend to hide the facts from people when they're dying are, I think, both expressing a very negative and insulting attitude towards people they otherwise say they think highly of. But that's a very short remark that needs a lot of implication, I'm afraid.
So then in your own case, I guess you'd rather be told if you were about to die.
Yes, I think there are things that I would like to be able to say and do in such time that remain to me.
Well, our time is up as of right now. We've been
I hope not in that way.
Not that way. I'd like to thank Dr. Baruch Brody, Chairman of the Philosophy Department, for being here. And this is Phil Constantine for To The Point.
To the Point is produced by the Rice University Information Office at the studios of Rice Radio, KTRU, in Houston.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave comments down below as long as the language is family friendly. And if you would like to subscribe to my channel, just click on the button over on the right-hand side. Thank you very much.